Welcome. I'm Mark McAdoo, and I will lead us through this discussion of organizational change drivers. This is the first of 4 presentations on organizational change. Today, we will examine the drivers of organizational change, and in future conversations, we will explore strategies and tools to help managers lead it effectively. Throughout this series, we will evaluate real-world situations and study ways to initiate, implement, and sustain major change. When you develop an effective organizational strategy, even obstacles can become stepping stones. Thinking ahead keeps you ahead, so I hope you enjoy this presentation on drivers of organizational change. The need for integrated strategic alignment may drive corporate change. For example, Microsoft's pivot to the cloud was accelerated because Satya Nadella was able to align product roadmaps, key performance indicators, and strategic investment in Microsoft Azure. Think of strategy, culture, and execution like a 3-legged stool. If one leg is weak, the whole thing tips over. That's basically what happened in a few well-known corporate cases. Strategy said one thing, culture said another, and execution just sat there wondering which meeting it was supposed to attend. So in contrast to Microsoft's experience, GE's digital push was hindered by an unclear scope and competing priorities, which slowed their progress. Boeing's unsuccessful attempt to manage the need for change was hindered by its cultural emphasis on cost and schedule over engineering rigor, which contributed to resistance to safety-related process changes after the 737 MAX crisis. Workforce dynamics may also drive organizational change. For example, NVIDIA's rapid scaling in AI succeeded because specialized technical talent and strong leadership enabled the fast deployment of innovative products and partnerships. It's important to recognize that strategic clarity sets direction. Cultural disposition determines staff receptiveness, and the change management team is responsible for executing change by defining and communicating the objectives and measuring progress with key performance indicators. If any of these aspects is weak, the probability of adoption decreases sharply. So, strong alignment across all 3 dimensions correlates with higher success rates, faster implementation, and better return on investment. Corporate change really comes down to alignment. When strategy, culture, and execution align, you get something like Microsoft's cloud experience. When they don't line up, you get what consultants politely call learning experiences, and what shareholders sometimes call what happened to my return on investment. Technology transformation is another example of an internal driver that may kick off a change initiative, and a technology transformation may lead to other organizational changes. In fact, this was the case for UPS, where its new route optimization algorithms also drove changes in dispatcher roles. The adoption of new operational models or processes could necessitate other structural changes. For example, changing who does what and when could shift authority or approval rights towards individuals with the data access necessary for informed decision making. Such changes with an emphasis on data-rich teams could even create new roles such as data engineers or product owners, while also shrinking the role of older legacy layers of control. Walmart provides a recent real-world example. When Walmart pivoted from a brick and mortar focus to a stronger online presence, it created integrated tech merge teams and streamlined in-store and online operations. In this example, drivers of structural change included the need to standardize web pages because of the high visibility of the online environment, the expectation to deliver product information more quickly, leading to the flattening of organizational structures, and the need to quickly automate online publication, leading to the sharing of platforms and information between organizational silos. In another example, we see that research and development, or R&D priorities, can also drive the need for organizational and structural changes to facilitate newly developed products and services going to market more quickly. I'd say that most organizations are extremely aware of their immediate transactional environment. They know their customers, their suppliers, and their competitors. But sometimes they're so focused on the chessboard right in front of them that they forget that the entire table might be moving. Therefore, it's vital for the organization to also be aware of the broader social environment, including demographic dynamics, social values, technological changes, employment levels, interest rates, the regulatory environment, and much more. This broader dynamic environment presents both challenges and opportunities that might determine success or failure. Companies tend to obsess over the competitive battlefield right in front of them. The problem is that the broader environment is like the weather, which is quietly changing the entire scope of the environment, and they're not even aware. External market forces such as shifting demands, the logistics and availability of raw materials and intermediate components, competitive pressure, and margin squeeze are drivers that may prompt organizational change. Unfortunately, if the organization has not engaged in strategic planning, these external forces often trigger reactive moves rather than effective tactics, likely resulting in less than ideal outcomes. The range of external drivers is dynamic, reflecting sector volatility and data uncertainty. The implications are often negative due to shorter planning horizons, more on-the-fly tactical reallocations, and increased risk of missteps when the market is highly uncertain. However, competitive intensity often correlates with higher innovation rates, potentially resulting in a big win for those who win the R&D race. But the outcome is never certain due to confounding factors such as capital flow, technology shocks, and other highly variable market dynamics. Macroeconomic volatility reminds companies that their 5-year strategic plan sometimes has a life expectancy of about 5 months. So, macroeconomic volatility is a reality that firms must navigate. Macroeconomic volatility can be quite dynamic. For example, an interest rate shock may trigger cost restructuring across the board. Overall volatility prompts firms to adopt flexible cost structures, shorter planning cycles, and scenario-based investment strategies. So, economic factors such as interest rates, inflations, and global growth shape capital cost, demand, and investment appetite, potentially driving the need for organizational change initiatives. Political actions and government regulations vary by industry sector. However, they can be powerful drivers of change. Therefore, scenario planning is a critical step in organizational strategy. So companies should build regulatory what-ifs into their strategy and capital plans. Companies need to stress test their cost, talent, compliance, and supply chain across multiple policy scenarios to ensure that they are in the strongest possible position in the global marketplace. In a volatile economy, strategy becomes less about predicting the future and more about making sure the company doesn't panic when the future shows up sooner than expected. For example, U.S. tariffs disrupted global markets and macroeconomic conditions in ways that few expected. Tariffs raised domestic prices in the United States, reconfigured supply chains, and modestly slowed growth while shifting trade relationships. Those firms that proactively modeled various regulatory scenarios and were therefore prepared to make quick adjustments to their supply chains were in better strategic positions and more likely to preserve their profit margins in the uncertain, highly volatile global environment. So, the lesson is simple. Scenario planning may feel like overthinking the future, right up until the time when the future shows up with new tariffs and a 300-page regulatory update. Stakeholder expectations evolve regarding environmental, social, and governance policies, also known as ESG. In general, stakeholders expect companies to invest in stronger ESG measures and to provide more transparent disclosure of corporate investments and ESG-related risks. The implications are that reputation risk may rise and social license may become a strategic asset if you manage ESG properly. Companies integrate ESG into product design, supply chains, and talent strategy. However, organizational strategy is not a static plan. It must continuously evolve to ensure effective operational performance. Strategy is a forward-looking action plan to achieve the organizational goals in a dynamic environment. Scenario planning takes a holistic view of possible operational environments that may emerge in the future. There are three essential components of this strategic design. First, the organization must identify its goals, how the organization defines itself, and its vision, what the organization wants to achieve. Second, it must evaluate possible future environments, providing context for future goals and actions. Third, and finally, you must have an action plan, what the organization will do, and a plan for how it will do it. Hypothetical scenarios based on assumptions are the central component of strategic planning. These assumptions form the organization's strategic reasoning, underpinning the logic of its strategic positioning and strategic objectives, why the organization does what it does, and how it does it. More specifically, and much more importantly, Scenarios provide managers with a basis for strategic reasoning and an original perspective on possible future environments. The way they see the future will reflect the drivers they consider significant, the storylines they consider important, and the creative input of their internal staff. This unique view of the future is the birthplace of strategic distinctiveness. The expression of perceived future environments is both deliberate and significant. First, it acknowledges that the future exists as images or perceptions in our minds. There are no facts about the long-term future. These hypothetical scenarios provide important guidance for success in different future operating environments. Developing a strategic plan is like a thought experiment, exploring multiple possible future environments with starting assumptions grounded in current operational data. Organizational sustainability requires awareness of the life cycle of social change. Eventually, an idea whose time has come will emerge from the embryonic stage, become established, and then begin its decline before it is replaced by something new and more relevant. There are many examples of this life cycle. The Pony Express was replaced by the telegraph, which was later replaced by the telephone. Film cameras were replaced by digital photography. Videotape rentals were replaced by DVD drop boxes, which were later replaced by online streaming. The list goes on. Being aware of this trend allows the visionary leader to see the potential of a new idea in its embryonic stage, and this allows the successful leader to foresee the decline before it erodes, providing time to pivot to the next emerging trend in this dynamic cycle. Strategy represents the organization's response to its perceived potential future environments. The organization's sense of identity is the prism through which managers see the world. It acts as a sort of filter, determining the relevance they attach to changes in the external environment and the range of activities they consider in response to for us or not for us scenarios. An organization's identity is basically its pair of glasses for looking at the world. The problem is, sometimes those glasses were prescribed a long time ago. What you do and how you do it are the superficial activities of the organization, the visible functions, products, and services that tend to define your organization in the eyes of outsiders, customers, and other stakeholders. For example, if you ask most people what General Motors does, they'll say they make cars, which of course is true. But if you ask General Motors' strategy team, they would probably say something like Advanced Mobility Solutions, which is consultant talk for GM makes cars. However, these activities are not fixed. They are simply transient manifestations of the company's capabilities, vision, and mission in the present moment. Capabilities refer to the combination of resources and competencies that enable an organization's business operations. These capabilities can include intellectual property and skills, internal culture and processes, raw materials, infrastructure and assets, regulatory protection, or external partnerships. What a company does today often looks permanent, but historically, it's usually just a snapshot. After all, a lot of companies that once defined entire industries are now mostly remembered as useless trivia. Vision refers to the scope of the organization's ambition, what it wants to be or achieve. It provides direction for future strategic priorities, objectives, and actions. The organization's mission represents its purpose, its reason for being. It is at this level that the organization's sense of identity is formed, as managers determine what business they are in. Organizations get themselves into trouble when they have a narrow or rigid sense of identity that limits their ability to detect and respond to changes in the external environment. For example, Tesla sees itself as a technology company, not a car company. This is a broad, dynamic vision that allows it to ride market waves with greater flexibility. So, the real strategic question isn't just what do we make, it's how broadly do we define who we are. Because that definition quietly determines which opportunities managers will even notice in the first place. There are many tools that managers can use to help them look to the future and develop strategy plans. One example is the PESTLE analysis. The purpose of this tool is to scan the macro environment to identify external factors that could affect strategy. The categories include political, which looks at regulations, trade policy, and government stability. Economics, which looks at growth, interest rates, inflation, and unemployment. The social dimension, which looks at demographics, cultural norms, and consumer behavior. The technological aspect, which looks at innovations, automations, and digital adoption. Legal criteria, which evaluate compliance, labor laws, intellectual property, and others. And finally, last but not least, the environmental factors, which examine sustainability, climate risk, and resource availability, often important for raw materials and sometimes even waste disposal. The PESTLE analysis tool can be used to identify emerging risks and opportunities, feed scenario planning and strategic decisions, track trends over time for early warning, and so it is very useful. PESTLE provides a structured framework for insight, but it must be iterative and updated regularly to remain actionable and relevant. A SWOT analysis is another useful tool for strategy development. The SWOT analysis examines various dimensions that affect strategy. For example, the strength analysis examines potential competitive advantages that may be achieved by leveraging organizational resources. The weakness analysis identifies aspects of the organization that would benefit from capability building or outsourcing. I think it's important to note that any time you identify a weakness or a threat, you need to also develop a solution to address that issue. Don't ever go to your manager or CEO with a problem unless you have one or more potential solutions. Next is the dimension of opportunities, and these often emerge from matching organizational strengths with market needs, creating opportunities for growth, through strategic investment or new offerings of products or services. And finally, there's the threat dimension. These often come into focus when matching or mismatching organizational weaknesses with market opportunities. When threats are identified, the organization must develop a risk mitigation strategy through scenario planning. And for each dimension of the SWOT analysis, organizational leadership must develop an impact rating for the good, which are the strengths and opportunities, as well as the bad, which are the weaknesses and threats, based on their likelihood of occurrence and the impact significance. And this will allow the leadership team to prioritize its actions. Lean Total Quality Management, or Lean TQM, represents another tool. Lean Total Quality Management events are designed to identify process inefficiencies and develop organizational change initiatives to ensure that the operation runs smoothly. Lean Total Quality Management is applicable to corporations, nonprofits, and government entities. The operational issues shown on this slide are examples of systemic process problems that would be well suited to lean intervention rather than individual ad hoc fixes. Lean Total Quality Management events are typically 5-day workshops designed to move quickly from problem identification to implementation solutions rather than producing reports that simply sit on a shelf. The waste categories shown here come directly from lean practice and translate cleanly into federal grant environments where delays and errors have potentially significant financial consequences. Of course, lean does not eliminate any federal requirements, but it can dramatically reduce the friction in how those requirements are met. Sponsor engagement is critical, especially in government agencies where authority to change processes, forms, or decision rules must be explicit under that chain of command. If we continue with the hypothetical example of a lean total quality management workshop for a government entity overseeing a grant program, we see that from the sponsor perspective, lean total quality management is not a cost-cutting exercise. Rather, it is a way of thinking about workflows and how they are organized across the organization, and how value is delivered to other stakeholders like grantees, taxpayers, and oversight bodies. If there are acute challenges or problems that need a quick diagnostic evaluation and solution, the 5 whys technique is a tool that can be applied even more quickly than a lean event. The 5 whys technique involves asking why multiple times to drill down into the details of a problem until the root cause is identified. The number 5 is not fixed. It represents the typical depth required to uncover the fundamental underlying cause of a problem, and it may vary from situation to situation. The purpose of the 5 whys is to move past the surface level symptoms and address the underlying issues that cause the problem. This approach helps prevent reoccurrence and supports sustainable solutions. The implementation of this tool begins by identifying the problem. You must clearly define the issue that needs to be resolved. This involves gathering initial information and understanding of the problem scope and impact. And then you ask the first why. Ask why the problem occurred. Look for immediate causes or factors that contributed to this issue and document those responses. Then you will ask subsequent whys. Continue asking why for each following answer, and each answer should lead to another why question, progressively uncovering deeper layers of the problem. Typically, 5 iterations are used, though this number can vary depending on the issue's complexity. Identify the root cause by the time you reach the 5th why, or potentially earlier, using the questioning, which should reveal the root cause of the problem. This is the fundamental issue that needs to be addressed to prevent reoccurrence. And then you will develop and implement solutions. Once the root cause is identified, you'll develop a targeted solution to address it. Implement these solutions and monitor their effectiveness to ensure the problem is actually resolved. If we look at a hypothetical example of using the 5 whys in a practical scenario, we see the problem is a company's online customer service portal crashes frequently. So we ask, why did the online customer service portal crash? The answer comes back, because the server was overloaded. We ask, why was the server overloaded? The answer comes back, because there was a sudden spike in user traffic. We ask, why was there a sudden spike in user traffic? The answer comes back, because a promotional campaign was launched without prior notice to the IT department. We ask, why was the promotional campaign launched without prior notice? The answer comes back, because the marketing and IT departments lack a coordinated communication plan. We ask, why do the marketing and IT departments lack a coordinated communication plan? The answer comes back, there is no formal process for interdepartmental communication and collaboration. So we've identified here the root cause. The company lacks a formal process for interdepartmental communication and collaboration. And we can develop the solution to develop and implement a communication protocol that ensures all departments are informed about promotional campaigns and other initiatives that could impact other operations. As you might guess, environmental scanning is not about predicting the future with precision. If strategists could do that, they would be hedge fund managers instead of giving presentations like this one. The real purpose is to stimulate thinking about what might happen by identifying external forces beyond the organizational control that could affect the organization in the future. This process starts with a clear strategic challenge and insights based on internal information, which provide the framework for what to scan. Once the current environment is documented, the organization can use this baseline information to begin projecting possible future scenarios. Those scenarios then act as a reference map. As new information appears, scanners look for signals that confirm a scenario, contradict it, or suggest an entirely different future is emerging. In short, managers must keep checking whether reality is cooperating with the plan. This creates a simple feedback loop. Understanding the present, imagining possible futures, monitoring signals, and adjusting strategy. The difficult part for many people is that future scenarios come before the facts arrive. Facts are great for explaining the past, They are less helpful for predicting what hasn't happened yet. So scenario building requires judgment, creativity, and a willingness to run thoughtful what-if experiments. Waiting for perfect data about the future usually means the future has already come and gone, and your organization probably missed the boat. Although the drivers of organizational change differ by industry sector, we see that some change drivers are found across different types of organizations. All types of organizations, including nonprofits, governments, and corporations, are affected by the broader economic and legal environments. Every type of organization has stakeholders, and these stakeholders have expectations that the organization must address. Technology moves forward, and every organization must be prepared to keep up with evolving technology. Of course, businesses want profits to grow, but nonprofits and government organizations must also grow and evolve to remain relevant. Naturally, there are also industry sector specific drivers. For example, nonprofits and government entities may be prompted to change if stakeholders require a change in mission scope, if legal requirements alter compliance needs, or if economic conditions change, resulting in opportunities such as new grants or challenges like funding limitations. Corporations and private businesses must change in response to market pressure, regulatory environments, and customer behaviors. Ultimately, every organization must effectively grapple with these change drivers if it is going to survive and thrive. The alternative is the organization's end. So, understanding the drivers of change is literally a matter of life and death for the organization. In closing, change rarely shows up alone. It's usually pushed in the door by a combination of external forces and internal realities. Success comes from alignment. Your people, processes, and culture have to be in line with what's happening outside the organization, such as customers, competitors, technology, and the economy. When those things move in the same direction, strategy starts to work. When they don't, you end up with a lot of meetings. That's where the tools help. Pestle helps scan the big external forces shaping the landscape. SWOT connects internal strengths and weaknesses with external opportunities and threats. Scenario planning helps us think through possible futures before they happen. And process tools like Lean Total Quality Management help align technology and workflows with real outcomes. If you get the alignment right, change becomes sustainable. If you get it wrong, the organization will still experience change, just not the kind anyone has hoped for. So, let's end with this simple question. What's actually driving change in your organization right now? Thank you.